The building exhaled when the last of the day shift people left. I could feel it, a great sigh shuddering through the polished marble floors and up the steel skeleton of its 52 stories. The air, once thick with the scent of burnt coffee, cheap perfume, and the anxious sweat of commerce, settled into something clean and sterile. It smelled of industrial-grade cleaner and the cool, metallic tang of dormant electronics. This was my time. The quiet hours between 9 post-meridium and 2 in the morning, when the only sounds were the hum of the servers, the whisper of the ventilation, and the frantic scratch of my pen on vellum. My name is Leo, and for the better part of a decade, my life had been a study in controlled isolation, played out in the glass-walled cage of my office on the 37th floor. My world was rendered in shades of gray and blueprint blue. I was an architect, a good one, known for my obsessive attention to detail and my willingness to work the kind of hours that made partners smile and spouses file for divorce. My own partnership had dissolved years ago, a casualty of these very hours, and I had since retreated into the clean, predictable geometry of my work. It was easier. Buildings didn't have feelings. They had stress tolerances, load-bearing walls, and wiring schematics. You could understand them. You could predict their behavior. People were a chaotic, unpredictable mess I no longer had the energy to solve. So I worked. I drowned myself in the elegant logic of structural engineering and the aesthetic puzzles of facade design. The quiet of the empty office was a balm, a shield against a world that always felt too loud, too demanding. The city sprawled below my window, a glittering, indifferent nebula, and I felt safely removed from it, an observer in a high-tech terrarium. The loneliness was a dull, constant ache I had learned to classify as peace. It was a lie, of course, but a functional one. My routine was immutable. I'd work until my eyes burned and the lines on the page began to swim. Then I would pack my satchel, turn off my desk lamp, and walk the long, silent corridor to the elevator bank. The building had a skeleton crew at night, a few cleaners who moved like ghosts through the lower floors, and the security team. For years, the night guards had been a rotating cast of faces, older men whittling away the hours with paperback novels, or college kids cramming for exams under the dim lobby lights. I barely registered them. They were part of the building's nocturnal machinery, as unremarkable as the automated lighting system. Then, about 6 months ago, he had appeared. His name was Julian. I only knew that because I'd glimpsed the embroidered tag on his crisp, dark blue uniform shirt. He was different from the others. There was a stillness about him, a coiled energy that seemed at odds with the profound boredom of the job. He wasn't old, probably in his early 30s, same as me. He had dark hair, cut short and neat, and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. But it was his eyes that held you. They were a deep, quiet brown, and they missed nothing. When he looked at you, it felt like being measured and weighed. Our interactions were minimal, microscopic. A nod as I passed his desk in the lobby. A quiet good night that was more of a low rumble in his chest than a spoken phrase. I found myself becoming a student of these fleeting moments. I analyzed the slight tilt of his head, the way his fingers rested on the curved edge of his console, the almost imperceptible tightening of his lips that might have been the beginning of a smile. It was pathetic, I knew. I was a grown man, projecting a universe of meaning onto a security guard who was probably just counting the minutes until his shift ended. But in the barren landscape of my emotional life, these tiny observations were the only vegetation. Tonight had been particularly brutal. A deadline had been moved up, a client had rejected a set of renderings I'd spent a week perfecting, and the coffee machine had finally given up the ghost. By the time I finally admitted defeat, it was past 3. My shoulders ached, and my brain felt like a sponge full of static. I made my way to the elevators, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. I pressed the down button and leaned my forehead against the cool, brushed steel of the door, closing my eyes. The chime was soft, startling me. The doors slid open with a whisper of compressed air. And there he was, Julian. He wasn't inside the car. He was standing just outside it, one hand holding the door, the other resting on the rail inside. He was holding the elevator for me. This had never happened before. Usually, the car just arrived, empty and waiting. He looked at me, his expression unreadable as always. But his eyes seemed softer in the dim light. Maybe it was just my exhaustion. Cutting it fine tonight, Leo, he said. His voice was even lower than I remembered, a smooth, calming sound that seemed to absorb the frantic energy buzzing under my skin. He knew my name. I was sure I had never told him. He must have seen it on the building directory. Of course. That was it. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. I was a mess. My hair was probably sticking up in 16 different directions, my shirt was rumpled, and I knew there was a smudge of graphite on my cheek. Yeah, I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. Big project. I stepped into the elevator, careful not to brush against him, though the space seemed to shrink with him standing there. I expected him to let the door go, to step back and return to his post. He didn't. He stepped in with me, his presence filling the small car. He smelled clean, like soap and freshly ironed cotton, with a faint, almost undetectable scent of something woodsy, like cedar. The doors slid shut, encasing us in the small, softly lit box. My heart began to beat a frantic, stupid rhythm against my ribs. I stared at the floor indicator, watching the numbers descend as if they were the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. 37, 36, 35. The silence was immense. It wasn't the empty silence I was used to. It was a charged, heavy silence, filled with the sound of his quiet breathing and the thrum of the elevator cables. I was acutely aware of him standing beside me, not too close, but close enough that I could feel a faint warmth radiating from his body. I risked a glance. He wasn't looking at the numbers. He was looking at me. His gaze wasn't interrogating, just observant. He leaned one shoulder against the polished wood paneling of the elevator wall, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. The posture was casual, but the stillness was absolute. "You look exhausted," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. "Comes with the territory," I replied, trying for a casual tone and failing. I sounded like I was being strangled. The elevator continued its smooth, inexorable descent. I felt a sudden, bizarre wave of panic. The ride was almost over. In a few moments, the doors would open, this strange, intimate bubble would pop, and I would step out into the cold night, back to my empty apartment and my solitary life. The thought was unexpectedly devastating. Just as the indicator hit 3, he moved. He reached out and pressed the door hold button. The elevator juddered to a gentle stop. The interior light flickered once, then held steady. The silence now was absolute, the hum of the mechanism stilled. My breath hitched in my throat. I turned to look at him, my mind a complete blank. What was happening? Was there an emergency? Was the elevator broken? He met my gaze directly. His eyes were dark and serious. He hadn't moved closer, but the space between us felt electric. "No rush," he said, his voice a low murmur that vibrated through the floor. He gestured vaguely with his chin towards the chaos I embodied. The frantic energy, the exhaustion etched onto my face. "Just stay with me for a minute. Stay with me." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. It wasn't a command, not really. It was an invitation. An offer of a moment's pause in the relentless forward march of my life. He was offering me a sanctuary, a 30-second reprieve in a stalled metal box, 3 floors above the ground. And in that moment, staring into his steady, quiet eyes, I felt something in the carefully constructed fortress of my solitude begin to crumble. A single, terrifying, wonderful crack in the foundation. My heart is hammering. This is present tense. Right now, I am in a stalled elevator with a man I barely know. A man whose quiet presence has become the focal point of my lonely existence, and he has just told me to stay with him. My brain, the overthinking, analytical engine that designs buildings, sputters and dies. It has no blueprint for this. All it can produce is a single, blaring alarm. Danger. Vulnerability ahead. I should say something. I should ask what's wrong. I should make a joke to diffuse the tension that is thick enough to taste, metallic and sharp like ozone before a storm. But I can't. I can only stand there, my leather satchel digging into my shoulder, and look at him. His face is calm. This is the most unnerving part. He isn't anxious or aggressive. He is perfectly, unnaturally still, as if he does this every day. As if stopping elevators mid-descent to hold strangers captive for a moment of quiet contemplation is part of his job description. "Okay," I hear myself say. The word is a whisper, barely audible over the blood pounding in my ears. He gives a small, slow nod, as if I've just agreed to some complex contractual term. His gaze doesn't waver. It's an anchor in the swirling vortex of my confusion. I realize I'm holding my breath and force myself to exhale, the sound loud in the enclosed space. He doesn't react. He just watches, his expression a careful neutral. I wonder what he sees. Does he see the desperate loneliness I try so hard to hide? The years of quiet yearning? Or just a tired architect who needs a damn break? He uncrosses his arms and points to the emergency phone panel. The intercom buzzed just as you got on. They're testing the system on the lower floors. Said it might cause a brief stop. Figured it was better to be prepared than to have you panic. Oh, of course. A system test. A logical, practical, completely impersonal reason for this entire situation. The frantic bird in my chest settles, its wings drooping in disappointment. The tension in my shoulders, which I hadn't even realized was there, loosens. I feel like an idiot. A complete and utter fool who had spun a simple mechanical issue into a moment of profound human connection. The heat rushes back to my face, this time born of pure embarrassment. Oh, I say again, the sound flat. Right? Thanks for the warning. No problem, he says. His voice is still that same low, even tone. But his eyes, something in his eyes has shifted. Is that amusement? A flicker of something knowing? I can't be sure. His face is a masterclass in subtlety. He presses the door hold button again, and with a soft lurch, the elevator resumes its journey. The final 2 floors pass in what feels like an eternity of my own mortification. The doors slide open to the lobby. The air here is cooler, smelling faintly of rain from outside. Julian steps out first, turning to face me. He stands there for a moment, blocking my exit. Get some sleep, Leo, he says. It's an order, but it sounds like a plea. I lie. I'll go home, lie in bed, and spend the next 4 hours replaying every second of the last 5 minutes, dissecting it with the precision of a surgeon, searching for a meaning that wasn't there. He steps aside, and I walk out into the grand, empty space. The sound of my shoes on the marble seems deafening. I don't look back as I push through the heavy glass doors into the damp night air, but I can feel his eyes on me all the way to the street. That night began the shift. The system test, the logical explanation, did little to erase the feeling that had sparked to life inside that elevator. The feeling of being seen. The next day, and the day after that, I found myself manufacturing reasons to stay late. A minor revision to a floor plan. A sudden inspiration for a lighting fixture. I was chasing the ghost of that moment, hoping for another glitch in the system, another excuse for our paths to cross in a way that broke the mundane script of good night and have a good one. I became a connoisseur of his quiet routines. I learned that he did a full sweep of the upper floors at 10:15 post-meridium, his footsteps steady and measured in the hallway outside my office. I learned that at midnight, he would sit at his console and drink coffee from a large, dark green thermos, his back straight, his focus absolute even when the bank of monitors in front of him showed nothing but empty rooms and silent corridors. I learned the way he would subtly shift his weight from one foot to the other when he stood for too long, a barely perceptible motion that spoke of a discipline I couldn't comprehend. I started watching him on my computer, pulling up the internal security feed for the lobby. It felt shameful, voyeuristic, but I couldn't stop. I'd minimize the window whenever I heard footsteps, my heart leaping into my throat. I watched him deal with a late-night delivery, his movements economical and authoritative. I watched him talk on the phone, his expression unchanging, revealing nothing. I watched him simply sit there, a bastion of calm in the sleeping building, and I felt a strange sense of peace, a borrowed serenity. Our brief interactions became charged with a new significance. One evening, as I was leaving, I fumbled my security pass, dropping it on the floor. Before I could even bend down, he was there, scooping it up in one smooth motion. He rose, and for a second, we were standing closer than we ever had before. His fingers brushed against mine as he handed the card back. His skin was warm, the calluses on his fingertips rough against my own. The contact lasted no more than a second, but a jolt went through me, sharp and clear as a static shock. "Careful," he said, his voice a low rumble. His eyes held mine for a beat too long, and I saw that flicker again, that hint of something knowing, before his professional mask slid back into place. "Thanks," I mumbled, my voice thick, and practically fled into the night. I started leaving things for him. Nothing overt. A newspaper left on the lobby coffee table. An extra bottle of water from the office fridge set down near his desk as I passed. I told myself it was just a polite gesture, a small kindness. But it was more. It was a message. I see you. I'm thinking of you. I never knew if he received the message, or if he even noticed. He never mentioned the items. But the next day, the newspaper would be gone, the water bottle vanished. It was our own silent, one-sided conversation. One Tuesday, I was working on a particularly frustrating elevation detail. The lines wouldn't resolve, the proportions felt wrong. I'd been staring at the same sheet of paper for 3 hours, my frustration mounting with every failed sketch. I finally threw my pen down in disgust, the clatter echoing in the silent office. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes, and let out a long, frustrated sigh. A soft knock on my open office door made me jump. Julian was standing in the doorway. He wasn't in his usual spot in the lobby. He was here, on the 37th floor. My heart did a nervous flip-flop. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Heard a noise." "Just me," I said, gesturing vaguely at the mess of crumpled sketches on my desk. "Fighting with a building." He stepped into the office, his presence immediately making the space feel smaller, more intimate. He moved with a quiet grace that was captivating. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were scanning the drawings pinned to my wall, the models on my shelves. He was taking in my world. "This is what you do," he said, another one of his simple statements of fact. He stopped in front of a scale model of a library I had designed a few years back. It was one of my favorite projects, full of complex angles and soaring open spaces. He looked at it for a long time, his head tilted slightly. "You create spaces for people," he said, his voice soft, almost thoughtful. He ran a single finger gently along the edge of the model's roofline. It was a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that it made my breath catch. "I just watch over them. It's not that different," I found myself saying. "We're both trying to create a sense of order, a sense of safety." He turned his gaze from the model to me, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, slow curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and erasing some of the stoic severity. It was like watching the sun break through clouds. "Maybe," he said. The smile faded, but the warmth remained in his eyes. He lingered for another moment, the silence between us comfortable, companionable. It felt less like an interrogation and more like a truce. Then, with a slight nod, he was gone, his footsteps receding down the hall. I sat at my desk for a long time after he left, the ghost of his smile imprinted on my mind. I didn't get any more work done that night. I couldn't focus. The neat, orderly world of lines and angles had been disrupted by something messy and human. The quiet of the office no longer felt like peace. It just felt empty. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm, a delicate dance of advance and retreat. The barrier of professional distance between us had been breached, but neither of us seemed to know what to do next. Our encounters were still brief, still couched in the language of polite necessity, but they were underpinned by a new current of awareness, a shared secret that neither of us had spoken aloud. I started to notice the little things he did for me. On rainy nights, I would find one of the lobby's large umbrellas leaning against the wall by the exit, waiting for me, even though I had never asked for one. If I looked particularly stressed when I came down, he would have a cup of coffee waiting on the edge of his desk, not the burnt sludge from the office machine, but something rich and fragrant from his own thermos. He'd just nod towards it as I approached. "Looks like you need this more than I do," he'd say, and I would take it, my fingers brushing his, the warmth of the cup seeping into my cold hands. I, in turn, became bolder in my small offerings. I'd bring down an extra sandwich from the deli, leaving it for him with a muttered, "They gave me the wrong order." I started buying 2 newspapers in the morning, leaving one for him every night. It was a courtship conducted through small, deniable gestures, a conversation held in the spaces between words. I was living for these moments, these tiny fragments of connection in my otherwise sterile life. The work that had once been my refuge now felt like an obstacle, the hours I had to get through before I could go downstairs and see him. The city lights outside my window, once a symbol of my detachment, now just seemed like a backdrop to the quiet drama unfolding in the lobby 52 stories below. The real breakthrough, the moment the foundation truly shattered, came on a Thursday night in late October. A storm had been brewing all day, the sky a bruised purple-gray. By 10 post-meridium, the wind was howling around the corners of the building, and rain was lashing against the windows in furious, horizontal sheets. The lights flickered once, twice, and then, with a groan that seemed to run through the very bones of the skyscraper, they died. Everything went black. The hum of the servers, the whisper of the ventilation, the glow of my computer screen, all of it, gone. The silence that descended was absolute, a profound, deafening emptiness. And it was dark. A thick, impenetrable darkness that my eyes couldn't pierce. For the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine spike of fear. I was alone, 37 floors up, in a dead building. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking slightly. Its screen flared to life, a small, inadequate island of light in the vast darkness. I had no idea what to do. The emergency lights in the corridor hadn't even kicked on. Was I trapped? I was halfway to the door of my office when I saw it. A small, steady beam of light, slicing through the darkness at the far end of the hall. It was moving towards me, calm and purposeful. It was Julian. He held a heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that could probably stun a bear. He swept the beam across the floor, then up to my face. I had to shield my eyes. "You okay?" His voice was calm, reassuring, cutting through the oppressive silence. "Yeah," I said, my own voice trembling slightly. "Just dark. Whole grids down on this side of the city," he said, stepping closer. He lowered the beam of the flashlight, so it wasn't shining directly in my face. "Backup generator should have kicked in. It didn't. We're going to have to walk." "Walk?" I repeated stupidly. "Walk where?" "Down," he said, a hint of dry humor in his tone. 37 flights. You up for it? I wasn't, not really. But it wasn't like I had a choice. "Lead the way," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He pushed open the heavy door to the emergency stairwell. The air inside was cool and smelled of concrete and dust. It was an alien space, one I had only ever seen on blueprints. Julian shone his light down the seemingly endless spiral of concrete steps. "Stay close behind me," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "And hold the handrail." I did as I was told, stepping into the stairwell behind him. He started down, his footsteps sure and even. I followed, my hand gripping the cool metal rail, my phone's weak flashlight beam bobbing nervously on the steps in front of me. The only sounds were our footsteps and our breathing. We descended in silence for the first few floors. The darkness was disorienting, and I focused all my attention on not tripping. Julian seemed completely unaffected. He moved with an easy, practiced rhythm, the beam of his powerful flashlight cutting a clear, steady path for us. Around the 30th floor, he paused. I nearly walked right into him. He turned, playing the light over my face. "You doing okay?" "Fine," I lied, trying to catch my breath. My legs were already starting to ache. "We can rest for a minute," he offered. He sat down on the top step of the next flight, patting the concrete beside him. I sank down gratefully, my legs feeling like jelly. We sat there in the dark, the beams of our lights crossing in the dusty air. "You're not scared of the dark, are you, Leo?" he asked. There was a teasing note in his voice, but his eyes, visible in the reflected glow, were serious. "No," I said a little too quickly. "Just not used to the building being so quiet." "It's never quiet," he corrected me softly. "You just have to listen differently." He switched off his flashlight. The darkness slammed back in, total and complete. For a second, I panicked again. Then he spoke, his voice a low murmur right beside me. "Listen." I held my breath and listened. And he was right. It wasn't silent. I could hear the faint whisper of the wind finding its way into the stairwell. I could hear the distant, mournful siren of an emergency vehicle miles away. I could hear the steady, calm rhythm of his breathing right next to me. I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. "I used to do this for a living," he said after a long moment, his voice pulling me from my trance. "Sit in the dark and listen." "The army," I guessed. He was silent for a beat. "Something like that," he finally said. "You learn a lot about a place when you can't see it. You learn where it breathes, where it groans. This building, it's got good bones. It's strong. He was talking about the building, but it felt like he was talking about something else entirely. We sat there for a few more minutes, sharing the darkness. It was no longer frightening. It was intimate. A shared secret. A space where the normal rules didn't apply. I felt an insane urge to reach out, to find his hand in the dark, to feel that solid, reassuring presence next to me. I didn't. I was a coward. He switched his flashlight back on, the sudden brightness making me blink. All right, let's keep moving. We're not even halfway there. He stood up, offering me a hand. I took it without thinking. His grip was firm, his hand calloused and strong. He pulled me to my feet easily, and for a moment, he didn't let go. We stood there on the narrow landing, his hand holding mine, the flashlight beam illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us. The world seemed to shrink to that single point of contact. Then he released me, his hand dropping back to his side. "Come on," he said, his voice a little rougher than before. And he started down the stairs again. I followed, my hand tingling where he had touched it. The rest of the journey passed in a blur. My tired legs, the monotonous concrete steps, the echoing silence, it all faded into the background. My entire consciousness was focused on the man walking in front of me, on the solid set of his shoulders, on the memory of his hand in mine. By the time we reached the lobby, my legs were shaking with fatigue. The ground floor was eerily silent, the vast marble expanse lit only by the red glow of the emergency exit signs. Julian walked me to the front doors, which he had to unlock manually with a heavy key. He pushed the door open, letting in a blast of cold, rain-soaked air. The streetlights were out. The city plunged into a strange, unfamiliar darkness. "You have a car?" he asked. I shook my head. "I take the subway," which obviously wouldn't be running. He looked out at the dark, wet street, then back at me. A frown creased his brow. "You can't walk home in this. It's not safe." "I'll get a cab," I said, though I knew the chances of finding one were slim to none. He was silent for a moment, his gaze searching my face. He seemed to be weighing a decision. "My truck's in the underground garage," he said finally. "It'll run. I'll give you a ride." "You don't have to do that," I protested weakly. "You have to stay here, don't you?" "The building isn't going anywhere," he said, a ghost of that smile touching his lips. "And my shift ends in an hour anyway. Wait here. Don't move." He disappeared into the darkness of the lobby, leaving me standing by the open door. I watched the rain fall on the empty street, my mind reeling. A power outage, 37 flights of stairs. And now, Julian was going to drive me home. The carefully ordered world I had built for myself was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, and I found that I wasn't scared. I was terrified, and I was hopeful. He returned a few minutes later, shrugging on a heavy jacket over his uniform. He held out a large, black umbrella. "Here." I took it, and we stepped out into the storm together. The world outside the building's protective shell was chaotic. Wind tore at the umbrella, and rain soaked the cuffs of my trousers in seconds. Julian's truck, a big, dark blue pickup that looked like it could survive the apocalypse, was parked just up the street. He unlocked it with a chirp, and we scrambled inside, slamming the doors against the raging storm. The inside of the truck was a revelation. It was spotlessly clean, organized, and smelled faintly of him. That same clean, woodsy scent, now mixed with the smell of leather and rain. It felt like a private, personal space, a world away from the sterile impersonality of the office building. He started the engine, and the dashboard lights glowed to life, casting his face in a soft green light. He turned to me. "Where to?" he asked. I gave him my address, my voice sounding small in the sudden intimacy of the truck's cab. He just nodded, put the truck in gear, and pulled out into the dark, deserted street. The drive was slow, the windshield wipers battling against the deluge. We didn't speak. The only sounds were the rhythmic squeak of the wipers, the drumming of the rain on the roof, and the low rumble of the engine. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was something else. A comfortable, weighted silence, the kind that exists between people who have been through something together. I watched his hands on the steering wheel. They were strong, capable hands, navigating the storm-slicked streets with an easy confidence. I felt safe. It was a feeling so foreign, so unfamiliar, that it was almost painful. He pulled up in front of my apartment building. A brick pre-war walk-up that suddenly looked small and shabby compared to the steel and glass monolith we had just left. He put the truck in park but left the engine running, the wipers still keeping their steady beat. "Here we are," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling completely inadequate. "For the stairs. For the ride. For everything. It's my job to make sure you get out of the building safely," he said. But his eyes told me it was more than that. He was looking at me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. The professional veil was gone. It was just him. Just Julian. I should get out. I should say goodnight and go inside. But I couldn't move. My hand was on the door handle, but I couldn't bring myself to pull it. "Leo," he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. He didn't say anything else. He just said my name. But the way he said it, it was full of a question he wasn't asking. And in that moment, something in me broke. The fear, the caution, the years of carefully guarded loneliness, it all just shattered. I leaned across the console. I am leaning across the console. My hand comes up to cup his jaw, the slight roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow a jolt against my palm. His eyes widen, just for a second, a flash of surprise in the green glow of the dashboard. He doesn't pull away. He doesn't move at all. He just watches me, his breath held. This is it. The point of no return. I close the small distance between us and press my lips to his. It isn't a perfect kiss. It's clumsy, born of desperation and exhaustion and a yearning so profound it feels like a physical ache. My lips are cold from the rain. His are warm. For a moment, he is completely still, a statue under my touch. My mind screams at me, "Mistake. This is a mistake. Pull back. Apologize." But then he moves. His hand comes up to cover mine where it rests on his jaw. He doesn't push it away. He presses it closer. And then, he is kissing me back. It's not a frantic kiss. It's slow, deliberate. A question and an answer all at once. It's a kiss that tastes of coffee and rain and something that is purely, intoxicatingly Julian. He shifts in his seat, turning towards me, deepening the kiss. His other hand comes to rest on my shoulder, his thumb stroking the tense muscle there, and I feel a shiver run through my entire body. All the anxiety, all the stress of the past few hours, the past few years, seems to meld away under his touch. This is not a fantasy. This is not a meaning I have projected onto a random act of kindness. This is real. This is happening. The sheer, unadulterated reality of it is overwhelming. I am kissing my security guard in his truck in the middle of a citywide blackout, and it feels like the only sane, logical thing I have ever done. I pull back, just an inch, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Our foreheads are resting against each other. I can feel his breath on my lips. I keep my eyes closed, afraid that if I open them, he will be gone, that this will all dissolve back into the lonely reality I know. "Leo," he whispers again. This time, my name is not a question. It's a statement, a confirmation. I open my eyes. He is right there, his dark eyes searching mine. There is no confusion in his face. No regret. Just a quiet intensity that mirrors the storm raging outside. I start to say, my voice hoarse. I don't know how the sentence is supposed to end. I should go. I should apologize. I should have done this months ago. "Stay," he says, the word a soft command. It's not about the truck. It's not about the rain. It's the same thing he said in the elevator, but this time, I understand the real meaning. Stay with me. He doesn't kiss me again. He just looks at me, his thumb still making slow, soothing circles on my shoulder. And in that look, I see it all. The loneliness I had recognized because it was a mirror of my own. The quiet observation that was not judgment, but interest. The patience of a man who knows what he wants and is willing to wait for it. The aftermath was a symphony of awkwardness. The next night, I almost didn't go into work. I paced my apartment for an hour, drafting and deleting a sick day email. The memory of the kiss, of the raw, unvarnished honesty of that moment in his truck, was so vivid it felt like a brand. What had I done? I had shattered the delicate, unspoken language we had built and replaced it with a clumsy, overt declaration. He was probably regretting it. He was a professional. I had crossed a line. I was a fool. Ultimately, the thought of not seeing him was more painful than the thought of facing him. So I went. I walked into the lobby with my head down, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I could feel his presence at the security desk before I even saw him. I risked a glance. He was staring at his monitors, his jaw tight. He didn't look up as I swiped my card. He didn't say a word. The silence was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered the air. I walked to the elevator, my back prickling, acutely aware of his eyes on me. I stepped inside, and the door slid shut, sealing me in with my own spiraling anxiety. The ride up to the 37th floor was the longest of my life. I had ruined it. I had taken something quiet and special and broken it with my neediness. I tried to work, but it was impossible. The blueprints on my desk were a meaningless jumble of lines. My mind was a looped recording of the silence in the lobby. I stayed at my desk for hours, paralyzed by indecision. Should I go down? Should I apologize? Should I just pack my things and leave, never looking back? Around 11, I heard footsteps in the hall. Not the usual, measured pace of his rounds. These were quicker, more purposeful. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath. Julian appeared in the doorway. He wasn't in his uniform jacket, just the crisp blue shirt. He was holding 2 steaming mugs. He didn't say anything. He just walked into my office, set one of the mugs on the corner of my desk, and then leaned against the doorframe, taking a slow sip from his own. It was coffee. I could smell the rich, dark aroma. It was from his thermos. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. I stared at the mug. It was a peace offering, or a dismissal. I couldn't tell. Last night, I started, my voice cracking. I had to say something. I had to fix this. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It was unprofessional. He looked at me over the rim of his mug. His expression was unreadable, that familiar stoic mask firmly in place. He took another sip of coffee before he spoke. "What are you sorry for, Leo?" he asked, his voice low and even. "For kissing you," I stammered, feeling the heat rise in my face. "You were just being kind, giving me a ride, and I took advantage." He set his mug down on top of a filing cabinet with a soft click. He pushed off the doorframe and took 2 steps into my office, closing the distance between us. He stopped on the other side of my desk, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "Do you really think I stopped that elevator a few weeks ago because of a system test?" he asked, his voice a quiet rumble. My mind went blank. "What?" "There was no test," he said simply. "I stopped it. You looked like you were about to fall apart, and I wanted you to have a minute to just breathe." He paused, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "I wanted to be in that elevator with you." The carefully constructed floor of my reality gave way. All my analysis, all my pathetic attempts to rationalize his behavior, had been wrong. He had been speaking a language I was too afraid to understand. "And last night," he continued, his voice softer now, "I didn't give you a ride because it was my job. I gave you a ride because I didn't want to let you go." He reached across the desk, his hand covering mine where it lay trembling on a stack of blueprints. His touch was warm and steady, an anchor in my sea of confusion. "The only thing I regret about that kiss is that you were the one who had to start it. I should have done it myself, a long time ago." Relief washed over me, so potent and overwhelming it almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't a mistake. He felt it too. He had felt it all along. I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers with his. His grip tightened. "I'm not good at this," I whispered, the confession feeling like a stone being lifted from my chest. "Words. People. You don't have to be," he said. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "I'm a good listener." We stood there for a long time, hands clasped across the blueprints of a building that had not yet been built, the silent office our witness. The mug of coffee he had brought me grew cold, forgotten. It didn't matter. I was warm for the first time in years. Our relationship began to take shape in the quiet, stolen hours of the night, in the empty spaces of the sleeping building. The lobby became our living room. My office became our sanctuary. He would come up on his breaks, and we would talk. I told him about my work, about the pressures and the small victories. He told me about his life before this, about his time overseas, speaking of it in vague, clipped sentences that hinted at a world of discipline and danger I could barely imagine. He spoke of it not with pride or regret, but with a quiet resignation, as if it were a life lived by another man. He had taken this job, he said, for the quiet, for the order. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he had a dry, wicked sense of humor that only appeared when he felt truly comfortable. He learned that my obsession with detail was just a way of trying to control a world that often felt chaotic and overwhelming. Our intimacy was built on small things. A shared look across the lobby. The way he would bring me a fresh cup of coffee just as I was starting to fade. The way I would leave a section of the morning paper open to the crossword puzzle, which I knew he liked to do. The physical side of our connection unfolded slowly, tentatively. A hand on the small of my back as he guided me towards the elevator. His arm brushing against mine as we stood looking out my office window at the city below. The first time he stayed in my office for his entire break, he didn't sit in the chair I offered him. He came and stood behind me as I sat at my desk, his hands resting on my shoulders. He began to knead the tense muscles there, his fingers strong and sure. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against his stomach, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with words. His touch said everything. It spoke of protection, of comfort, of a deep and patient affection that I was only just beginning to understand. Our first test came in the form of a man named Marcus, another guard who sometimes covered Julian's nights off. Marcus was loud, jovial, and missed nothing. One night, Julian was working a double shift, and Marcus was there to relieve him in the morning. I had stayed late, as usual, and Julian had walked me out. We were standing by the front doors, talking in low voices, when Marcus arrived. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Julian's face immediately became a stony, unreadable mask. I felt a flush of shame and fear. Marcus grinned, a wide, knowing smile. "Don't mind me," he said, winking at Julian. Didn't mean to interrupt. Julian just gave him a curt nod and turned back to me. "I'll see you tonight," he said, his voice flat and professional. But his eyes conveyed a different message. "Don't worry. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. The interaction left a sour taste in my mouth. It was a reminder that our quiet, private world existed within a larger one, a world that might not be so understanding. That night, I was quiet, withdrawn. Julian noticed immediately. He found me in the kitchenette, staring into a cup of tea as if it held the secrets of the universe. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle. "What Marcus said," I admitted, not looking at him. It reminded me that we have to be careful." Julian was silent for a moment. Then he came to stand beside me, leaning against the counter. "I'm not ashamed of you, Leo," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "And I don't care what Marcus or anyone else thinks." He reached out, his fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "The only thing I care about is you." I finally looked at him. His face was open, honest, his dark eyes full of a fierce sincerity that stole my breath. In that moment, I knew this was real. This was not a fleeting office romance or a temporary cure for loneliness. This was something solid, something with good bones. The final piece fell into place a few weeks later. It was our unofficial 6-month anniversary, if you counted from the night of the elevator system test. I had brought a small cupcake from a bakery near my apartment, and I left it on his desk in a little white box. He found me later, up on my floor. He didn't have the cupcake. He had a key in his hand. A single, simple key on a plain silver ring. He held it out to me. "What's this?" I asked. "It's the key to my apartment," he said, his voice steady. "My shift ends at 7 in the morning. I was hoping maybe you'd be there when I get home." It wasn't a question about one night. It was a question about all the nights to come. It was an offer of a world outside the 52 stories of steel and glass, a world that started not when my workday ended, but when his did. It was an invitation to build something new, together. I took the key. Its metal was cool and solid in my palm. It felt like the heaviest, most important thing I had ever held. "I'll make coffee," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. A real, brilliant smile spread across his face, the kind I had only seen once before. "I'd like that," he said. That was the last night I ever worked late just to see him. I still work late sometimes, when a deadline demands it. But it's different now. The quiet of the office is no longer a shield. It's just a place where I work. A place where I met the man who taught me how to listen to the silence. My home is no longer a lonely apartment. It's the feeling of his key in my pocket. It's the sound of his truck pulling up outside in the early morning light. It's the smell of his coffee brewing in the kitchen as the sun rises over the city. Sometimes, when I'm leaving the building, I'll pause in the lobby and look at the bank of elevators. I'll remember that night, The feeling of being trapped, of being terrified and hopeful all at once. I remember his voice, low and calm in the darkness. No rush. Stay with me. He wasn't just holding the elevator. He was holding a space for me. He was waiting for me to be ready to step into it. And every morning, when he walks through the door of our apartment, tired and rumpled from his shift, and his eyes find mine, I feel like I've finally, truly come home. The ache of loneliness I carried for so long is gone, replaced by a quiet, steady warmth that feels stronger than any skyscraper. It feels like safety. It feels like love.